A lot of people who don't know me assume that I'm playing music for ulterior motives, to either get attention or maybe to try to be like him because of some sort of insecurity. And actually, the real truth is that when my dad passed away, I really felt as if the only way to replace him was through music. And it never has really succeeded, obviously, fully, but it was my way of sort of feeling as if he was with me. And
imagine having your father taken from you in the most tragic, most public of ways, and then living 4 decades in silence while grappling with the weight of his legacy. Now, John Lennon's son is finally ready to step into the light and reveal the truth, and what he does will leave the world speechless. Over 40 years have passed since the world lost one of the most iconic and influential figures in music history, John Lennon. His sudden and violent death in 1980 left a deep scar, not only on his family members but also on millions of fans across the globe. That Lennon, who preached love and peace in his songs, should meet such a cruel end was heartrending news. Its echo would continue to resonate over the decades. The pain of that loss was real for his family, particularly his sons Julian and Sean Lennon, who were thrust into a world of unimaginable grief and relentless media scrutiny. The world has wondered for years how John Lennon's sons, especially Sean, the child Lennon had with Yoko Ono, have dealt with the legacy of their father's death. Sean's father was taken from him when he was only 5 years old. In that brief time, a bond between father and son had just begun to form, one that would leave an indelible mark on Sean's life. Unlike his more vocal older half-brother Julian, Sean was quiet about his relationship with John, focusing on his music career and the heavy load he had to carry in the world as the son of an icon. Sean Lennon has spoken for the first time, breaking 4 decades of silence. His revelations have sent shockwaves around the world, offering something deeply personal and unfiltered account of what it was like growing up in the shadow of such an immense legacy. Sean's words speak volumes, giving insight into the human cost beneath all the fame and fortune, and the complex nature of dealing with the loss of a father who belonged not only to his family but to the world. This deeply touching and enlightening account reveals intimate details about Sean's father, the pressures he faced, and how a tragic event shaped his life in ways that few could ever understand. He shares his struggles as a child, the pressures placed upon him, and how it felt to live under constant public scrutiny. Through such candid reflections, Sean brings to light some of the more hidden aspects of John Lennon's life and the deep impact his death had on those closest to him. The world has been endlessly fascinated by the story of John Lennon, but from Sean's revelations comes a new perspective, one that is both heartbreaking and deeply human. It's more than just personal catharsis. Sean is breaking his silence as a gift to his father's fans, offering a glimpse behind the curtain into the life of the man who made the music. One of the most touching legacies left behind by John Lennon, Sean's story has stood the test of time for those who knew and loved him. As we embark on Sean Lennon's revelations, prepare for surprises at points that may even shock you with the truth he speaks. This is a story of love, loss, and the healing power of time, a story finally being told after 40 long years. The global shock of John Lennon's death. Assassination. John Lennon, December 8th, 1980. It engraved a scar in the soul of humanity. For most, it was as if time stood still at that moment when a figure who had become synonymous with peace, love, and the revolutionary spirit of the 1960s was suddenly snuffed out of existence. The world was seized with disbelief and grief, reflective not just of the loss of a beloved musician, but of the end of an era that Lennon's influence had imprinted on culture, politics, and the collective consciousness. Lennon had been so much more than a Beatle. He was a spokesperson for his generation. From humble beginnings as a Scouse sensation to the most famous band in the world, the acerbic wit of Lennon and his boundless creativity, mixed with a rebellious spirit, became hallmarks of the cultural changes taking place in the 1960s. He loudly opposed the Vietnam War and supported civil rights, using his platform to rally for peace. Most famously, he participated in the events labeled Bed and for Peace with Yoko Ono. He was more than a musician. To millions, he was a beacon of hope and change. The news of his being shot outside his New York City apartment sent shockwaves around the world so unbelievable to comprehend. How could someone who embraced and preached peace die in such a tragic and violently degrading way? The world was still reeling from the assassinations, wars, and political upheavals of the last decades, and Lennon's death seemed to be the tragic culmination of those years of turmoil. Grieving was instant and universal. From New York to Tokyo, from London to Buenos Aires, people held vigils. In New York, thousands of candle-carrying mourners flocked to Central Park to mourn their departed hero with songs. It wasn't just fans grieving, it was a collective heartbeat reaching out in sorrow, as if people believed they'd lost something personal, a friend, a guide. For so many, Lennon had been a voice for hopes, dreams, and frustrations often his own. Somehow, this man they had never met was deeply felt. In the days that followed his assassination, the airwaves saluted him. His music played back-to-back on the radio, special programs rotated through television networks, and newspapers filled their pages with stories about his life and legacy. The outpouring was reminiscent of the deaths of other cultural icons like Martin Luther King Jr. and John F. Kennedy, individuals who had left an indelible stamp on society through their lives and work. Yet Lennon's death was even more tragic in some ways, depriving the world of a man whose work wasn't just a reflection of politics and culture, but a body of art that transcended time and space. Lennon's assassination also initiated discussions about the darker side of celebrity. Chapman, his killer, was an obsessive Lennon fan who had turned violent. This grim reality forced the world to confront the dangerous intersection of celebrity and mental illness, as well as the obsession that can foster in the minds of those who blur the line between admiration and delusion. It also raised questions about gun control in the United States, with many calling for stricter laws following such an inane act of violence. The response to Lennon's assassination from all corners of the world underscored how deeply people felt connected to him. His message of peace and his calls for love and understanding resonated across cultural and national boundaries. In a world often appearing on the verge of chaos, Lennon's words and music provided comfort and unity. The grief was not only for the man himself, but for what he symbolized: a world where love and peace could be more than ideals, but real possibilities. Early life and relationship with his father. Sean Taro Ono Lennon was born on October 9, 1975, sharing a birthday with his father, who celebrated his 35th that day. Sean's arrival marked a new turn in John's life. He retired from the relentless pace of fame and devoted himself to his family. Unlike his half-brother Julian, with whom John had often been distant in his early years, leading to a strained relationship, Sean experienced a different side of his father, caring, present, and deeply involved in his life. One of the most historic decisions John ever made was to step back from the music world and become a stay-at-home dad. To the world, he was a rock star, an icon, and a symbol of rebellion. But behind the walls of the Dakota Building in New York, he was just daddy. It was not merely a change in priorities for John. It was a conscious choice to provide Sean with the kind of childhood he felt Julian had missed. John often referred to those years as idyllic, filled with love, creativity, and the focused attention of a father who was determined to be a constant presence in his son's life. From an early age, Sean was immersed in a world of music and art. John and Yoko's household was a haven of creativity, with musicians, artists, and intellectuals frequenting their home, providing a place for Sean's imagination to flourish. John introduced Sean to music early on, teaching him guitar and piano. These weren't just music lessons, they were bonding moments between father and son. Sean fondly remembers how John would sit with him for hours, playing chords, singing songs, and encouraging him to express himself through music. One of Sean's most cherished memories is how John used to sing him to sleep every night. Among these lullabies was often a rendition of Beautiful Boy, Darling Boy, which John had written for Sean and included on his 1980 album Double Fantasy. The lyrics speak volumes about John's love for his son. Close your eyes, have no fear. The monster's gone, he's on the run. And your daddy's here. The song became a symbol of their bond and a testament to John's commitment to being a protective and loving father. As Sean grew older, his father's influence on him became even more apparent. John wasn't just a father, he was also a mentor. He encouraged Sean to explore his artistic inclinations and supported whatever path he chose. Sean often describes his father as an endless source of inspiration, teaching him to question everything around him, seek the truth, and never fear being different. This upbringing helped Sean forge his identity not just as the son of a legend, but as an individual with his own voice and vision. However, Sean was all too aware of the immense legacy his father carried with him, and the expectations always placed upon him. There was always pressure to live up to the Lennon name, but John never pushed those pressures onto Sean. Instead, he encouraged Sean to carve his own path, to find something he loved and commit to it with the same passion and dedication that John had poured into his own music. The respect between John and Sean was mutual. John never treated Sean as a mere child, but rather as an equal, whose opinions and feelings were just as valid as anyone else's. That mutual respect forged an unbreakable bond between them, a bond that resonated deeply in their interactions, whether it was discussing the latest music, playing together in Central Park, or simply sharing quiet moments at home. Tragically, Sean's time with his father was cut painfully short when John was assassinated on December 8, 1980. Sean was just 5 years old, too young to fully comprehend what had happened. In an instant, he lost his hero, his mentor, and his best friend. The chasm left by John's death was something Sean would grapple with for the rest of his life. Despite the brevity of their time together, the impact of their relationship left a profound mark on Sean, influencing both his life and his career. Growing up in the shadow of a legend, for Sean Lennon, the son of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, life could hardly have been less typical. From the moment he was born, Sean was thrust into a world of high expectations, media scrutiny, and the weighty burden of his father's iconic legacy. The Lennon name carried with it an almost mythic weight, a fact that could be both a blessing and a curse for any child. From an early age, Sean knew his life was not like that of other children. His father wasn't just a musician, he was a cultural icon, a symbol of peace, and the voice of an entire generation. John Lennon's influence reached far beyond music into the social and political movements that defined an era. This meant Sean was always in the public eye, even before he understood what that meant. Paparazzi never left him alone, and his every move was scrutinized by a world eager to see how John Lennon's son would turn out. The pressure on Sean to live up to his father's legacy was immense. From a young age, there were expectations that he would meet the same standards his father had set, not only in music, but also in embodying the ideals John had stood for. This created a dual burden for Sean. He was not only expected to succeed in his own right, but he was also tasked with carrying on the Lennon name, a daunting responsibility for anyone, let alone a child. As he grew older, these pressures only intensified. He was constantly compared to his father by the media, by fans, and even by those who expected him to be a living, breathing extension of John Lennon. Everything Sean did, especially in the creative arena, was measured against the monumental achievements of his father. Whenever Sean pursued music, critics and fans alike searched for traces of John's genius in his work. The Lennon name cast a long shadow not just in music, but in every aspect of life, where people expected Sean to uphold the same values and ideals that had made his father a global icon. This pressure was compounded by the fact that Sean lost his father at such a tender age. When John Lennon was assassinated, Sean was just 5 years old. As he grew up, he had to navigate his father's legacy largely on his own, without John there to guide him. The absence of his father left a void, one that was quickly filled by the expectations of the world. For Sean, it wasn't just a matter of living up to his father's name, it was also about understanding what that name truly meant without the benefit of John's presence. Yet despite the pressures, Sean was determined to forge his own identity, one that was both connected to and separate from his father's legacy. He embraced music, but on his terms, exploring genres and styles that were uniquely his. His work with bands like Cibo Matto and his solo projects showcased a versatility that allowed him to carve out a niche apart from his father's Beatle-era fame. But no matter how far Sean ventured, he could never fully escape the comparisons to John Lennon. He had to walk a thin line, striving to live up to his father's name, while also establishing his own. Despite these challenges, Sean managed to build a well-rounded music career, though not without its struggles. In interviews, he has spoken candidly about the difficulties of being John Lennon's son, acknowledging both the privilege and the burden it brings. The privilege, of course, came from being part of a legacy that changed the world. The burden came from the weight of expectations, constant comparisons, and the sense that no matter what he achieved, he would never truly escape his father's shadow. More recently, Sean has opened up about these struggles, sharing them with a new generation of fans who may not fully grasp the complexities of his life. His honesty has endeared him to many, as it provides a glimpse into what it's really like to grow up as the child of a legend. In this way, Sean's decision to speak out has helped demystify the Lennon legacy and has humanized the iconic name, revealing the personal challenges, identity struggles, and search for self-worth that he has faced. Ultimately, Sean Lennon's journey is one that attests to the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the immense pressures of growing up in the shadow of one of the world's most famous people, Sean has managed to carve out his own identity and make his own contributions to the world. His story is not about living up to a legacy, but about finding the strength to define one's own path in life, even when that path is overshadowed by a legend. Why Sean Lennon kept silent. Sean Lennon's decision to remain silent for decades about the death of his father, John Lennon, is a complex emotional tale. The world knew John Lennon as a legendary musician and peace activist, a cultural icon, but to Sean, John Lennon was simply dad when tragedy struck on that cold December night in 1980. Sean was only 5 years old. The impact of such a traumatic event at such a tender age cannot be overstated. For Sean, it was more than just the loss of a father, it was a life-changing event that would define the very core of his existence. The years following John Lennon's death were emotionally tough for Sean, as his father's legacy weighed heavily upon him, along with the world's relentless curiosity. Unlike other children who lose a parent, Sean had to mourn in the public eye, with millions of fans sharing in his grief. To the world, an icon had been lost, but to Sean, the man who read him bedtime stories, played music in the living room, and nurtured his early love for the arts was gone. As Sean grew older, the pressure to live up to his father's legacy only intensified. Expectations from the world, as well as from himself, were immense. How does one live up to the legacy of a man who helped define an entire generation? For Sean, the answer was to retreat. Silence became his shield, a way to protect his sanity from the overwhelming weight of public expectation. The psychological impact of John Lennon's death was profound. Losing any parent at such a young age is traumatic, but for Sean, the pain was compounded by the fact that his father's death was not just a personal tragedy, it was a global event. All that shock, all that grief, all that confusion, Sean had to process it under the constant gaze of the world. In many ways, Sean's silence can be seen as a form of self-preservation, a way to grieve privately without intrusion from the outside world. Another layer to Sean's silence is tied to the complex relationship he had with his father's legacy. John Lennon wasn't just his father, he was a man whose life and work had touched the lives of millions. His words, his music, and his ideals were no longer his own or even his family's, they belonged to the world. For Sean, speaking out would mean opening up his father's legacy to scrutiny, potentially altering the idealized image so many people held. It's a heavy burden for any son, let alone the son of John Lennon. Moreover, Sean's time with his father was tragically brief, and he has had to piece together his father's identity through the memories of others, the stories told about him, and the music John left behind. This fragmented experience of a father made it even more difficult for Sean to put into words who John Lennon truly was. How does one describe a man he never really got to know, especially when that man is John Lennon? Sean Lennon's revelations. The untold story. For all these years, until Sean Lennon finally decided to break his silence, the world waited, wondering what he might reveal. Living as the son of an extraordinary legacy, Sean had kept most of his thoughts and feelings about his father's death to himself for nearly 4 decades. Now, in a series of candid and startling revelations, Sean has spoken for the first time, offering insights that not only change our perception of John Lennon, but provide a deeply personal account of how his assassination tore their family apart. Perhaps the most unexpected aspect of Sean's revelations is the tangled emotions he harbors toward his father. To the world, John Lennon was a symbol of peace and love, but in Sean's telling, their relationship was far more complex, often painful. As Sean grew up, he became acutely aware of the larger-than-life persona his father had, but he also recognized the vulnerabilities and struggles that the public never saw. Sean admits that, even while John was viewed as the perfect father and husband by many, there were times when he felt emotionally distant from his father, whose mind was often preoccupied with music and activism. It's a candid admission, Far from the idealized version of John Lennon that many fans have, Sean also shares the emotional aftermath of his father's assassination, a tragedy he was too young to fully understand. He explains that in losing John Lennon, he lost a part of himself that could never be replaced. Growing up, the weight of his father's legacy became heavier with time. Sean candidly admits to having feelings of anger and resentment, not only toward the man who took his father's life, but also toward the world's expectations that he live up to the Lennon name. It's a raw, honest glimpse into the emotional roller coaster that can overwhelm those left behind by fame and loss. But perhaps the most shocking revelations concern the dynamics within the Lennon household after John's death. Preternaturally articulate, Sean speaks candidly about the tensions between himself, his mother Yoko Ono, and his half-brother Julian Lennon. These tensions were often exacerbated by the intrusion of both the media and public interest in the Lennon family, which only intensified the pressure on Sean to live up to the Lennon name. According to Sean, the constant comparisons to his father and the relentless scrutiny often led to friction and misunderstandings within the family, making an already tragic story even more poignant. For Sean, finally breaking his silence has been a cathartic experience not just for him, but also for the millions of fans who waited to hear his story. By speaking out, Sean has been able to reclaim his narrative. Having lived for so long in the shadow of his father's legacy, Sean's voice was often lost amidst the echoes of John Lennon's fame. Now, by sharing his truth, Sean has stepped out from behind his father's shadow and given the world a new understanding of John Lennon, a man who was far more complex, flawed, and human than many ever realized. The impact of John Lennon's death on Sean's music career. Sean Lennon's career has always been intertwined with his father's legacy. From the moment he was born, Sean was thrust into the public eye, not only as the son of one of the most famous musicians in history, but also as someone who would eventually follow in his father's musical footsteps. His life and his music were profoundly shaped by the tragic death of his father when he was just 5 years old. Growing up, Sean was acutely aware of the enormous shadow cast over him by his father's legacy. John Lennon was not only a global icon, but also a man whose life and death were subjects of fierce public scrutiny. That scrutiny bled into Sean's life as he struggled with the dual pressures of mourning his father privately while the world watched. These expectations, combined with the unprocessed grief of losing his father at such a young age, followed him throughout his career and deeply influenced the direction he took with his music and his public persona. Sean's early musical efforts were marked by an urge to forge his own identity. His debut album, Into the Sun, released in 1998 on the Beastie Boys' Grand Royal label, revealed his eclectic influences and featured a sound that was distinctly his own, not an impersonation of his father's. Yet subtle hints of emotional turmoil were present, reflecting the absence of his father. The song Home expresses a longing for stability and connection, likely inspired by the void left by John's death. In interviews, Sean has said that music has been a form of therapy for him, a way to process the complex emotions surrounding his father's passing. As Sean's career progressed, the influence of his father's death became even more apparent in his music. His 2006 album, Friendly Fire, poignantly reflects personal tragedy and loss. While the album wasn't written about John Lennon, it conveys a feeling of grief and emotional weight that permeates the lyrics. The album, written in the wake of another traumatic event in Sean's life, the death of a close friend, can be seen as a concept piece dealing with themes of betrayal, love, and loss. One of the standout tracks on Friendly Fire is Dead Meat, a song ostensibly about betrayal but carrying an undercurrent of unresolved grief and anger. The lyrics, "You're the only one I've met who's afraid of the future," may reflect Sean's feelings about living under the shadow of his father's legacy, always being compared to John Lennon. No matter how talented he may be. In interviews, Sean has been candid about the challenges that come with being John Lennon's son, describing it as both an honor and a burden. He has often spoken about how much he admires his father's work, while also acknowledging the near impossible standard he feels he must live up to, a standard that has sometimes obstructed his artistic freedom. This tension is reflected in the introspective nature of his music, which often touches on themes of identity, legacy, and the search for personal meaning. The Lennon legacy, moving forward. As the son of one of the most iconic figures in modern musical history, Sean Lennon has always been aware of the burden that comes with his father's legacy, the late, great John Lennon. But this legacy is more than just musical, it's cultural and social. John Lennon was far more than a musician. He was an icon of peace, a voice for social justice, and one of those rare figures who inspired millions of people to dream of a better world. As John Lennon's son, Sean has spent a lifetime negotiating the privileges and challenges that come with such a monumental legacy. Now, as he steps into the limelight with his reflections on his father, Sean not only remembers John Lennon, but also frames how future generations will interpret and carry forward what John Lennon gave to the world. Sean's reflections on his father's legacy are deeply personal, carrying a weight that only he can fully understand. As the son of John Lennon, he has always been acutely aware of the responsibilities that come with that name, and he has taken his time to honor his father's message of love, peace, and creativity. In recent years, Sean has expressed a desire to carry forward his father's ideals through his music, cultural endeavors, and humanitarian efforts. His work in music production and collaboration with other artists speaks to his commitment to keeping the innovative spirit of John Lennon alive, while forging an independent artistic vision of his own brain. One way Sean plans to continue his father's legacy is by speaking out on the themes that were at the forefront of John Lennon's life and music. Peace, love, and social justice are just as relevant today as they were during John's lifetime, and Sean is committed to advocating for those causes. He has hinted at future projects that will delve even deeper into these themes, both musically and through collaborations with other artists and activists. These projects will likely cast a new light on the causes John Lennon championed, while also reflecting the complexities of modern life. While many remember John Lennon as a larger-than-life figure, Sean is helping to rewrite the narrative by offering a more personal, sensitive portrait of his father. By breaking his silence, Sean has given the world a glimpse into the man behind the icon, the father who sang lullabies, played music in the living room, and nurtured his son's love for the arts. Sean's revelations have deepened the world's understanding of John Lennon, making his legacy even richer and more emotionally resonant for his fans. In addition to his music career, Sean is also actively involved in social causes that his father supported, such as peace initiatives, mental health awareness, and environmental sustainability, all of which were important to John Lennon. By lending his voice to these causes, Sean not only keeps his father's memory alive, but also ensures that his legacy continues to have a positive impact on the world. In this way, Sean Lennon moves forward with a sense of purpose, actively embracing his father's legacy rather than passively inheriting it. Through his music, activism, and personal reflections, Sean creates a legacy that honors his father's memory while also forging a path uniquely his own. For John Lennon's fans, this is an exciting and meaningful development, as it ensures that the spirit of John Lennon will continue to inspire and uplift future generations. Conclusion. As we conclude this extraordinary journey of a son who deeply misses his father, it's clear that Sean Lennon's decision to finally speak out has offered the world a deeply personal and transformative glimpse into both John Lennon's life and legacy. Sean's revelations have not only deepened our understanding of the man behind the music, but also shed light on the profound impact of John Lennon's death on those who loved him most. By sharing his story with the world, Sean has honored his father in a way that is both touching and powerful, ensuring that John Lennon's message of peace, love, and creativity continues to resonate across generations.